Yo, what's up, bros? My name is Advi, and today we have a brand new, almost 2 hours long manhwa recap. And this manhwa was recommended and requested by you, bros. And I gotta say, I was having a blast while reading it. If you're not a bro, subscribe now to wake up about today and enjoy in the video. At the beginning of the story, we see two men standing on the edge of the mountain, enjoying a beautiful countryside view. Our protagonist's name is Kim Soo-ho, but in this world, everyone knows him as Lloyd Frontera. Mr. Lloyd had a vision of revolutionizing the village he lived in and completely changing the world. As he started laughing as a maniac, his assistant asked him if he had finally gone insane. A couple of years ago, in a small, beautiful village, Kim Soo-ho found himself lying on the ground. A window popped up and a message appeared and said that his wish had been granted by the Supreme Being, and now he became a fictional character in a novel called The Iron-Blooded Engineer. That was the novel he read the night before, so Kim was a little bit confused, knowing he didn't even drink that night, so he didn't understand what's going on right now. Suddenly, he realized he might have gotten into a situation like characters from the Reincarnated webtoons that he reads quite often. He wondered why he woke up lying face flat on a dirt road and realized it was a little bit cold and his mouth acted funny. A red-colored window popped and explained that his lips had gone numb due to sleeping on the street, and Kim swung at the window in anger because of its annoying messaging tone. He couldn't figure out who he was in The Iron-Blooded Engineer, and a moment later, a person approached and called his name, calling him Sir Lloyd. This person that approached him was the Iron-Blooded Engineer's main character, Javier Azrahan, and he said they should go back to the mansion. Kim was surprised because Javier looked completely identical to the novel's illustration. In the novel, Javier became well known all over the continent as the master swordsman Javier, even though he started off as a regular knight in a town named Arcos Frontera. Kim remembered that Lloyd was a baronet and a blockhead from Frontera, so it angered him a lot. They walked back to the mansion and Javier lit a fire, asking Lloyd if he remembered why he was outside. Lloyd said nothing, so Javier explained that he drank during the day, smashed up the furniture in the tavern, and then collapsed on the way home. He added that the Lord had sent him to save Lloyd. Lloyd was still feeling very cold, so Javier told him to take a rest, but he would have to report what happened to the Lord tomorrow morning. Lloyd then asked him if his house was drowning in debt, but Javier just exited the room and slammed the door. He remembered he read the last chapter of the novel and knew everything about it, so therefore he knew Lloyd's fate too. At the beginning of the novel, his father and mother got swindled by a wicked con man and lost all their property and estate, so Lloyd became a tramp and drank until he died. He then became angry at being reincarnated as Lloyd because he was the most useless character in the novel. The next day, Javier brought Lloyd's mother, Marbella Frontera, so they could talk about yesterday's incident. She asked Lloyd if he really broke the tavern's furniture, but Lloyd, knowing what exactly happened because he read the novel, just stood there and said nothing. His mother begged him to go and apologize this time, and Lloyd actually said he would. His answer shocked both Marbella and Javier since they expected a different outcome. The window popped up and informed him that his mother and Javier were quite surprised, so he got angry again, thinking they should be proud instead. Javier and Lloyd took a walk that day, and he noticed people and children were running away, not willing to make eye contact. At that moment, a window appeared and said that the people of this town are disgusted by him. Knowing everyone thought he was a dimwit, Lloyd decided to erase his image as a fool first. He thought that settling the house debt would be a good start because he was the heir to the country's lord and there was a possibility of living a wealthy life. Lloyd wondered if there were any cheats he could use, and a pop-up window appeared showing info about his special abilities. The window said Lloyd's skills were the scumbag, which was a passive skill that allowed him to make other people frown and run away from him, and the troublesome drunkard, allowing him to become a dog. These lame and insulting skills pissed off Lloyd, so he tried fighting the pop-up window. They arrived at the tavern, and as Lloyd started apologizing in French language, saying "Pardonnez-moi," Javier knew there was definitely something odd, as if Lloyd was a completely different person. The tavern's furniture and decoration were trashed, and Lloyd immediately started apologizing. The bar owner didn't expect his apology and started begging Lloyd not to punish him. Thinking he should be a little rude to balance out the conversation, Lloyd apologized in the most unnatural way possible, and a window popped up saying he really didn't know how to look apologetic. The bar owner said there was no need to apologize, and Lloyd just sat there looking at the bar owner, hoping they'd made peace. They left the tavern and took another walk. Lloyd complained to Javier about the owner's dissatisfaction with his apology, but Javier said it was natural and there was no need to worry about it. Javier said he broke all the furniture and decorations that were bought with the owner's blood, sweat and money, and if he doesn't get reimbursed, there's no way he would be satisfied. Lloyd felt annoyed having to pay his own debt too and not getting close with anyone in the village. He wondered what he could do to make the owner satisfied. Javier said that the owner's mother was suffering from the chills from last winter, so the damage he had done must be even more painful to him. Lloyd thought that the tavern was already pretty cold and gloomy because one fireplace was not enough to warm the entire place. Also, the old lady would have a hard time fighting the cold because heating stones haven't been discovered as a heating system in the novel. And then it hit him. Lloyd stopped and realized there was something he could actually do about it. Since the heating system hasn't been invented yet, all he had to do was build and sell it in his world. He thought that no one would ever dream of it coming from the doofus like Lloyd Frontera. Lloyd thought his major in civil engineering and design at school would be extremely helpful. In the army, he even managed to build a house in just a few days. He clenched his fist and decided to start the business and pay off the baronet's debts. Lloyd turned back and told Javier to follow him to the tavern to get his first order. Suddenly, a few windows popped up, showing Lloyd some info about the RP or relationship points. His RP being 0, Lloyd wondered if it would be an obstacle in future endeavors and thought that this might be like experience system in video games. Just as he wondered what exactly the RP meant, a window appeared above Javier's head and said his impression of Lloyd went down to -30. Lloyd thought that the number was extremely low and tried to fix it by looking at Javier and praising him for being really handsome. Unfortunately, it didn't go as planned and Javier's impression of Lloyd went down to -31. Lloyd decided to stop trying to be likable since it made their relationship even worse. Lloyd decided to visit the pub owner and pay for all the objects he had damaged and cover the entire construction cost. The owner listened to his words but simply couldn't believe what he was saying. Lloyd understood the old man didn't believe him, so he decided to use his bum image and stop acting nicely. He started acting like the Lloyd from the novel and told the owner that since they already see each other quite often, there was no need not to trust him. The owner got scared and immediately signed the paper, and a pop-up window appeared, mocking Lloyd for being rude and intimidating to the poor old man. Lloyd took the signed document and put it in his jacket, extremely happy for making his first contract. He told the owner that he made an excellent choice and then left the tavern. Javier stopped him and asked why he threatened the owner and made him sign a contract, since that was just another way of misconduct. Lloyd looked at him and asked why the sudden negativity and prejudice. Javier answered it wasn't prejudice, but just his experience, and made him think Lloyd would just make another mistake. Lloyd then said that the experience and prejudice were the same thing because both stem from the past. Javier said nothing, surprised Lloyd could talk so well. Lloyd dug the shovel in the ground, promising he'd make the owner and his mother smile no matter what. He kept digging the soil, moving and beating it, and then repeating the process for a long time. Then he brought the heavy lumber and started constructing the house. After that, Lloyd applied the red clay and soil for the exterior and decided to take a rest because his body was extremely physically weak. Even though it took a whole week, Javier said that the construction he made was really fast. He also wondered where he could have learned the housemaking skills and why he kept the promise to the tavern owner. Thinking there was no time to rest, Lloyd tried chopping the wood, but Javier jumped in for help. Lloyd explained how he wanted the wood being cut, and Javier managed to do it way better than he could have ever imagined. He thought Javier's skills could have been expected from soon-to-be sword master, so Lloyd asked him to help dig the soil too. Javier regretted his hard work instantly. Lloyd tried tricking Javier into believing that he actually wanted to help very badly because in order to see the final product. The trick worked and both of them started digging at full speed. Finally, the house was finished and it was time to call the owner. Javier noticed a strange symbol above the door and asked what it was, so Lloyd explained it was his brand logo. Lloyd mocked Javier and said they would enter the house and check what kind of trouble he caused to the owner this time. The house was small but had a very cool heating system that warmed up the floors. The owner was very surprised and his mother felt relieved because her joints were not stiffened up anymore. Lloyd made a house with a traditional Korean heating system, technology that was unknown to the people in the novel. The tavern owner thanked him and said it's been a long time since his mother had a smile on her face. Javier couldn't believe Lloyd kept his promise and wanted to make those people smile. But they were happy now, and Javier's impression of Lloyd increased by +2. Lloyd also acquired 36 additional RP due to a slight improvement in their relationship. He mocked Javier a bit more, saying he probably changed his opinion about Lloyd Frontera, but Javier said that was not the case. Thinking about expanding his business, he thought that the model house was merely for promotion. A few days later, people came and tested the hot house model, and Lloyd encouraged them to have one of those for themselves. He offered two types of contracts: A. Making a separate hot building, or B. Remodeling their existing house floor. Unfortunately, people couldn't fully trust him, so he tried intimidating them like he did the tavern's owner. Out of nowhere, Lloyd's father, Arcus Frontera, approached and confusedly asked what he was doing. His father's RP was at -20, and this made Lloyd quite nervous. Lloyd and his father went back to the mansion and sat at the dining table. His father asked what he was up to this time, and Lloyd said that the owner ordered a heated room, so he built one. Arcus said that deceiving and lying people wouldn't be tolerated, so Lloyd immediately knew that no matter what he does, people would always misunderstand him, so he decided to leave the table. Lloyd's father thought he started building houses in order to help pay their debt, so he promised he'd overcome the difficulties, but Lloyd thought he'd heard those words from his father many times before. Lloyd managed to convince dozens of people they needed a heated house, and he started thinking about the money needed for the construction. Walking down the hall, two loan sharks called Meatloaf and Shiloh walked by without greeting him. Lloyd wondered how they could walk past the Baron's son without greeting him, and then suddenly realized they could be the people who loaned the money to his father. The money lenders visited Lloyd's father's office and said he had 5 days to return the money. Shiloh yelled, asking Arcus to sell something from the mansion, and Lloyd thought their arrival was a great opportunity for him to show up. Earlier that day, Lloyd was thinking whether it was possible to use the RP he received after Javier's favorable impression of him increased. The window popped and explained he could improve his talent skills using the RP he earned. His skills like soil, hydraulic, and structural mechanics were detected, and he was offered to buy other skills based on his current knowledge, such as basic measurement and basic design. He had enough RP, so he bought both of them. The basic measurement allowed him to have a GPS measurement vision, and the basic design enabled him to visualize the design without needing a pen and a paper. Just what people say Nikola Tesla could have done too, bros. I don't know if you knew, but apparently he could build like an engine or whatever he envisioned in his mind. He could build it, test it, and if it didn't work, he could find why it didn't work. For example, if the screw was loose, and he would fix it. And this was all in his mind, but was identical in real life as well. I think Nikola Tesla unlocked the system Lloyd has currently right now. Now back to the story, sorry for the distraction. Lloyd wished he had knowledge in making heavy machinery, and the window popped up explaining he could summon random fantasy species by investing RP to draw an illusion species. He felt excited, but the problem was the cost. He had 1 RP and needed 49 more. Lloyd thought that the fantasy species were something like ancient animals, dragons and unicorns, and they would probably be useful as heavy machineries. Knowing he needed to earn favor from the key characters, he decided to help out his father. Meatloaf threatened Arcus he'd take his wife and maids to a place where they would sell well, and at that moment Lloyd entered the office. He put a hand over Meatloaf's shoulder, but he pushed him away and said he must be the Arcus's troublesome son. Lloyd asked him to show his invitation letter, since entering a noble's mansion without invitation was considered as trespassing, but the money shark said he was talking nonsense. Lloyd then called Javier and ordered to cut the trespasser's arm. Javier drew out his sword and the money sharks ran away, threatening he'd regret these actions. Arcus yelled at Lloyd and said what he did would not help in calming the situation. Lloyd took a big bag of money he received as a down payment and gave it to Arcus to help pay the debt. Arcus objected, but Javier reassured him there was no need to worry since he would monitor Lloyd in keeping his promise to the people. Arcus realized that Javier really believes Lloyd, so he let them go. Just as they left the office, Javier asked him how he knew about the trespassers law. Lloyd said he read it, and he really did, but while reading the novel before being reincarnated. In the novel, after Lloyd's father and his mother died, the money sharks wanted to dig for their corpses and sell them, but Javier knew the law, so he sliced their heads off, went to the court and got released because he was found not guilty. Lloyd realized that knowing the contents of the novel was a great benefit, and a moment later he received 60 RP after improving the relationship with Javier. As of now, he had 61 RP and was ready to summon one of the fantasy species. The night came and Lloyd found a place where he could summon the monster. He looked around, confirmed nobody was watching, and activated the random draw. A strange magic appeared in the air and created a small shining circle. Suddenly, a hamster head appeared, and it was not what Lloyd expected. The hamster fell on the ground and happily looked at Lloyd, but he thought the 50 RP used was just a big unlucky waste. "It's a failure," Lloyd said, and the hamster looked at him with tears in his eyes. Aw, bros, just look at this hamster. How can Lloyd have no heart like this? As Lloyd started heading home, the hamster started squeaking as if he was objecting. Lloyd came back and asked the hamster if there was anything useful he could do. Hamster chewed on something and spat it out. Lloyd took it and the paper said Podong's manual. One piece of paper said that Podong is a cute hamster and instructed the owner to treat it with love. The other piece of paper contained red and blue sunflower seeds and said the hamster could be fed with them. Red seed would increase Podong's size for 12 hours and the blue one would decrease its size. The manual said that the two seeds could be bought with 1 RP too. Lloyd fed the hamster to check how big he could grow, and to his surprise it grew about 10 meters tall. Podong's skills were excavation, ground hardening, and cheek pouch. He chewed on some clay and spat it out, so Lloyd immediately realized that hamster would be a great substitute for heavy machinery. He went back to the mansion and thought that showing up with the hamster would be very suspicious, but the problem would be solved if he brought a summoning book and just said he was a genius summoner. The next day, Lloyd gathered 30 soldiers near the riverside and started preparing them for work. Each one of them had a shovel in his hands, but all of them looked confused and lazy. Lloyd thought they looked like soldiers who get paid but do zero work, and finally understood why the Baron had a lot of debt. But gathering the soldiers was a good idea, he thinks, because there would be no additional labor costs. He explained that they were soldiers and therefore had to be serious about carrying out operations. Lloyd showed him the soil and explained he dug it up after working all night, but in reality it was all done by Podong, who dug all of it in 30 minutes. He said they'd be working on a heated room construct project and their first duty would be moving the soil to the construction site. The soldiers acted like crybabies, and a moment later, their general, Baron Senior Knight Newman, appeared and asked Lloyd what he was doing with his troops. There were 3 knights in the estates. Newman, Bayern, and the novel's protagonist Javier. At the beginning of the novel, Bayern and Javier stayed loyal until the estate collapsed, but Newman was the one who betrayed the Baron Arcus first. He was the one who had a lot of debt, so Lloyd thought there was no way Newman should be a senior knight. Newman complained that the military shouldn't do the dirty work, but Lloyd answered he received the Baron's permission. Newman then accused Lloyd of using the military for personal purposes. Lloyd knew he would approach him like that and asked if there was something wrong with wanting to use the military for personal gain, threatening to hit him with a shovel. Newman started clenching his teeth with anger. Lloyd then used the shovel to splash a bunch of dirt on the senior knight, and all of the soldiers got shocked. Newman's legs started shaking, and he asked Lloyd if he just tried to insult a knight, but Lloyd pretended he couldn't hear him and mocked him even more. Lloyd took his shovel and pointed it at Newman, challenging him for a duel. Now we learned that our protagonist actually did arrange a duel with Knight Newman, and it'll happen in a month. Upon learning about it, Javier questions Lloyd's confidence and ability to face one of the strongest knights in their ranks, the knight they all call Junior Sword Expert. How could a bum like Lloyd face such a knight? There's no way. But then again, Javier witnessed a change in Lloyd, so maybe there's still some hope. If only he didn't annoy him so much. Or maybe he challenged Knight Newman to get back to his ways of being a rascal. Lloyd then asks Javier if he could teach him the skills of swordsmanship, and in return, he'll make Javier's insomnia go away. He learned about this from reading the novel, of course, and this insomnia is something that sword experts generally have a problem with, so our protagonist knows the exact cause of it. It's because of his superhuman nerves that are too sharp, the so-called Sword Master Syndrome. At first, Javier rejects the offer, thinking that it might be dangerous for a person such as Lloyd, who is just a scumbag, to learn how to handle a sword. He might just cause more problems, he thinks. But then, thinking that it's impossible to get rid of his insomnia and that Lloyd will fail at becoming a swordsman, he agrees to it. Our protagonist actually manages to get Javier fall asleep by giving him to recite some magic construction techniques, and bros, let's face it, this would make anyone fall asleep. It's a bunch of gibberish, like the infamous 18th magic technique from the Reinforced Concrete Major book. Whatever. The next day they finally start Lloyd's training. Javier tells him to do 50 laps, thinking that this might discourage Lloyd and make him quit. But Lloyd actually accepts it with a smile, remembering all the difficulties he had in his real life. He had a difficult life, and though difficult, this is nothing compared to when he was in Korea. He didn't have a family to accept him, lived in a cramped space, moved bricks to the 4th floor of the villa every day. He loaded trucks with boxes all night, and all that just for the hope that one day things would get better and that he doesn't starve to death. He kept telling himself that things will get better and didn't want to quit. So, compared to that life, that pain and despair, this was nothing. As Javier observed our protagonist doing his lapses with a passion and not a trace of quitting, notice came up telling Lloyd that Javier's favorable impression of him went up by 1. At the palace, Knight Newman told Lloyd's dad all about how his son challenged him to a sword duel 1 month from now. Lloyd's dad found it unacceptable to bring disrespect to someone such as Knight Newman, who protected their family for 5 generations, and just when he thought he changed for the better. But he couldn't stop the duel now, as it is the custom. Lloyd's father tells Knight Newman to at least not badly hurt Lloyd during the duel and just teach him some manners. Though Newman seemingly accepts the request from the Baron, he actually has a different plan in mind. He intends to kill Lloyd and then both the Baron and Baron's wife if they make a big deal out of it. He'll just make it look like there was a suicide. Then, as he planned, he'll just move to a bigger place and forever leave the village. So all of this actually fits in his plan perfectly. A month later, the duel is about to start. Lloyd face to face with Knight Newman. As the crowd stands around, the tension can be felt in the the air. Newman asks if Lloyd is ready, and with extra spicy confidence, Lloyd tells him he is as he lifts his shovel up to his shoulders. Let's go, shovel bro! Lloyd, with shovel, is facing one of the strongest knights, and the confidence is just oozing out of him. People are rightfully surprised, and Knight Newman is annoyed, thinking that he's just trying to disrespect him more. But this is not a regular shovel, it's a shovel completely made of iron, as Lloyd requested blacksmiths to make for him. Javier observes people being disappointed, including Baron, but he knows what he saw this past month. He believes that Lloyd is serious about this. He trained hard, he did his basic training early in the morning without complaining, then he would go around construction site teaching the village engineers heating systems, then he would sword train until night. He was dedicated and passionate about it, and that isn't someone not being serious about this whole situation. The Baron announces the start of the duel between Lloyd Frontera and Knight Newman. Knight Newman leaps forward swinging his sword at Lloyd, but Lloyd just deflects it with ease. Newman keeps attacking Lloyd but to no success. Our protagonist defends all of the oncoming attacks. Javier, all shocked, thinks to himself how this technique is something that would take years to master, but Lloyd didn't have that much time, and he certainly didn't teach him these strange combat techniques. But this is something that Lloyd didn't actually learn in this world, but back in Korea. This is a military technique, and every man in Korea has to know this. The modern close combat technique, bayonet charge. The military service in Korea is mandatory, so that makes sense. And he chose a shovel for a reason. He can use it in many ways. As a shield, to attack with it, and even as a pogo. Newman, getting more infuriated by the second, gets deflected again. Our protagonist is actually using multiple skills in this duel. Besides shovel, he's using the basic sword techniques he learned from Javier. He's also using synchronized tool skill digging level 1, which enables him to be one in body and spirit with the shovel. He got this skill by increasing favorable impression of him from Javier, who saw him training so hard and being so dedicated, and for the Baron and Baroness who have seen Lloyd's sincerity for the first time in their lives. Newman realizes that Lloyd is not a regular old fool and that he has to use his special technique on him, Mana Heart. He reaves up his mana, concentrating it all in one spot. Javier understands what's happening and thinks that Lloyd has no chance to block the next attack, as to develop the Mana Heart takes at least 5 years, and he didn't have that much time. Knight Newman charges again, determined to send a final skull-crushing deadly blow, but Lloyd blocks it. The fourth skill he prepared for this duel is the mana technique that Javier, the strongest man in the novel, uses, and its name is Asarahan Core Technique. It's basically a mana absorption technique. You are able to absorb all of the mana from your opponent. Lloyd quickly absorbs all the mana from Newman and then heavy smacks him across the face with the shovel, so hard that his tooth comes out flying in the air. Oof! Lloyd smacked him again and again and again until Newman falls flat on his face. He got hit so hard that his eyes were popping out. Ooh, bros, what's going on here? People were flabbergasted when they realized that Lloyd actually won. They couldn't believe this happened. The Baron, in utter disbelief, announces the Lloyd's victory. But this wasn't it for Lloyd. He couldn't let a traitor get off the hook this easily, so he sends a barrage of shovel smacks on him. Few guys had to restrain Lloyd from hitting already defeated Knight Newman. Baron thought that his son lost his mind, but Javier knew better. He noticed that all this had to be calculated. Master Lloyd knew something, he thought to himself. Every hit he did wasn't random, it was exactly in places where it wouldn't hurt that much, and he had that calm expression on his face, as if he already expected everything that would happen. During Lloyd's training, Lloyd asked Javier to teach him that technique, Astrahan Mind Technique, a very special mana technique that can attract all of the mana from the user's surroundings and turn it into his own mana. Upon being asked about this technique, Javier was taken aback because he never revealed this technique to anyone, and on top of that, it's not even a completed technique. Our protagonist tells him that he learned about this technique when he put Javier to sleep, so he was sleep talking. Javier didn't seem too convinced about it, but regardless, says that anyway he couldn't teach him this technique as it's not a complete technique yet. Lloyd tells him that he might completed it and proceeds to explain his idea on how to complete this technique. Basically, Mana Heart is absorbing the outside mana and it would bounce out against each other because the outside mana is something foreign to the inner mana. So the mana that you get from the outside won't get mixed up with the Mana Heart. It needs to be treated separately as an additional engine that works with the main engine. They are one and the same thing, but separate from each other. Javier now grows even more suspicious of Lloyd. How does he know all these things? Lloyd just brushes off Javier's curiosity and says that it was just an idea that popped in his mind and that he'd be surprised if it actually worked. With this method, Javier is finally able to complete his Astrahan Mind technique that he's been working on for such a long time. Even only after first attempt, he manages to create 3 circles from one, and with a bit of more training, it could reach 4 or even 5 circles. After helping Javier develop his technique, Javier's favorable impression of Lloyd increases by 5. We learned that Lloyd learned the mana absorbing technique when touching things with mana. Javier is not that surprised that his master won because he already knew Lloyd had the ability to do so. Lloyd's dad tells Lloyd to stop hitting him because he's tarnishing a knight's reputation further. As if on cue, expecting to hear these words, our protagonist instructs the Baron to lift up the tablecloth, the proof that this knight doesn't deserve such words of honor. Under the tablecloth, Baron finds a bunch of letters that prove the guilt of Knight Numen, the letters to the knight from Tords, a guy who caused so much trouble at the Baron's property, the situation of the Baron's state, Baron's likes and dislikes, on faking of the property documents, and much more. Lloyd knew about the letters from the novel and he had Podong go get them. Knowing about how people perceived Knight Numen, including his good-hearted dad, he knows that he couldn't suggest capital punishment for treason. People would just make fuss about it. So instead he suggests to the Baron to punish him with dropping a ferocious rat on his head and then banishing him from the estate, or to demote him into a regular soldier and give him a chance for repentance. Lloyd intentionally suggested a rat as a punishment because people would think it wouldn't hurt the knight that much, so the Baron agreed from his naviate as he thought it was a reasonable proposition. Even Knight Numen agreed to it, but they were mistaken. Lloyd had something else on his mind. Forgiving and being merciful to the wrongdoers will not make sinners atone for their sins. It'll just make them exploit your kindness and they'll see it as a weakness. Numen already thought that this worked out really well for him, smiling, thinking all of the ways he'll get back at Baron. Lloyd just tells him that this is the last smile that he gets as he fed one of those red seeds to Podong. He tossed Podong into air and Podong starts growing in the middle of the air while falling back to the ground where Numen was lying. This caught everyone by a surprise as they saw a small mouse grow so huge in matters of seconds. Numen was there with an absolute terror in his face as the gigantic mouse was falling on him. He knew there's no escaping this. Podong fell with a huge blast, making a hole in the ground. Lloyd, satisfied with his solution to the problem, raises his hands and says, "Banished!" Next day, Lloyd already put Podong to use by making him excavate the roads. Podong was not a secret anymore. Even the once timid engineers now became surprisingly hardworking. Lloyd seemed to have had a good effect on them all. All of them seemed motivated now. Our protagonist's next plan was to build a road system called a Painway that ancient Romans used to use. They were huge fans of roads, so Lloyd would build it from Baron's mansion to the eastern hillside. hillside. The reason he's making the road is because he believes it will grow the popularity of their estate. All this just makes Javier even more suspicious. He questions Lloyd how he knows all of these things, like building a heating system that nobody heard about before, or summoning something that looks like a high-level magic. And as the suspicion increases, Lloyd gets a warning notification that his identity is in jeopardy and that he might be discovered. But he was ready for it. He knew that Javier is no dummy and that he is very perceptible. He expected him to become suspicious. But our protagonist already had a skill ready for this kind of situation, which is called persistence, which is basically just acting dumb and making half-convincing explanations. He said that he studied without anyone knowing and that even Javier himself didn't observe him for the whole 24 hours a day, and that while nobody was watching him, he studied and learned different skills, just like Javier learned to handle mana so well, even though he's still in his 20s. So just like Javier, he too is a genius. He used the moment, catching Javier confused, to change the topic and then left to sort some business out. He told Knight Baron to keep an eye on the business while he's gone. However, Javier reminds Lloyd that it's his duty to accompany Master Lloyd. Their business is in a remote small town of Ruden Estate where they need to collect the unpaid bills. In the inn in this small town, the real estate of scammer Thords, and we see this guy being all sweaty and nervous, saying that he has just lost a lot of money. The other guy with him reminds him that that's the nature of gambling. You get some, you lose some. Isn't that the way he earned all of his money in the first place? The guy with scared stoic face tells Throdes that if he can't pay him as an escort, he'll leave. Throdes, in a panicked voice, tells him that he can still pay him and not to leave. And as he was thinking of the ways he could make money and that he should probably hide because there are so many people looking for him, Lloyd barges in saying if he was talking about him. But Throdes didn't recognize him before Lloyd told him his name. Upon hearing his name, Throdes shows an utter shock on his face. Throdes' bodyguard asks if he should engage and kill Lloyd, but Throdes, still in a state of shock, tells him that they should just run away. The bodyguard picks him up and swiftly jumps through the window, landing in front of Javier, who was waiting there already with his sword out. Javier tells the bodyguard to hand Throde over and leave, or otherwise he'll treat him as an accomplice. Javier was informed by Lloyd of this exact move before they arrived here. He already knew they'd escape through the window and into the alley. The bodyguard challenges Javier, creating a crimson ball in his hand. He seems to be some kind of a magic user too. As it turns out, this is the first black evil magician Javier encounters. Lloyd recalls that Javier had some difficulties with his power in the novel, the power of gravity magic, but the circumstances were different now. This Javier is not the same one. Throde's bodyguard sends the crimson ball straight at Javier, but he deflects it with ease. We see that this didn't go as bodyguard expected it to go. When Javier fought the bodyguard in the novel, he was just an ordinary senior sword expert, but this Javier now has a mana heart with triple circles. Like our guy means business now. The black magic user realizes the strength of his opponent, says this was not a part of the contract, and just escapes, leaving Throdes by himself. Then Javier turns his gaze at scared Throdes and tells him that scamming noblemen is very severe and that he'll get an appropriate punishment. As he was about to swing his sword to cut off Throdes' legs, Lloyd jumps in front of him. With a visible worry on his face, he tells Javier that he'll be punished if Throdes goes to the court. This takes Javier back as he's not used to him being concerned with others' well-being. Of course, Lloyd wasn't actually concerned about Throdens, he just had a different idea on how to use this situation. He got him tied up and told him that it doesn't pay off to just simply cut his head off. But he wasn't to forgive him that easily either. The court handling it was not something on Lloyd's mind as well. Throdens tried to weasel out of the situation, saying nice things, asking for forgiveness, but Lloyd would have none of it. He presented his condition for forgiveness. All he needed to do to be forgiven was to sign a contract, a common work contract, where he'll even get paid but with minus 80% of the salary as a repayment for his debt, and the payment would be done after 520 years. Javier Javier, hearing this, realizes that Lloyd was definitely not sympathetic. After all, Lloyd thinks to himself, why would he kill someone that owes him so much money? That would be a big waste, inexcusable. He'll drain every little thing from him for the rest of his life. Throwden shows some reluctance signing this, but Lloyd threatens him into signing it. Next, we see our protagonist, his loyal companion Javier, and tied up Throwden's bros. I don't know why his name is so confusing to me. Thordens, Throwdens. I'm gonna call him Throwdens from now on. If I mix it up a little bit, I'm talking about the same guy. I'm so sorry. For some reason this word is so hard to pronounce for me. So anyway, we see three of them and riding in a chariot back to the Frontera estate, discussing their plans on how to use the money they got from Throwdens. Lloyd says that he's not planning on using that money to pay interests, but rather he wants to invest it in labor costs. 30 soldiers are not enough, he thinks. He put up a recruitment announcement and is wondering if anybody applied. A few days later in Frontera estate, there seems to be a lot of people in a queue waiting for their turn to apply for the job that offers 20 golds. Lloyd is surprised because he thought people hate him. Javier says that they probably do hate him, but he showed some organization and the construction of the heating systems are pretty cheap. While they were talking, a man approached their desk, interested in signing a contract, but the man also tells him that he's grateful to him because before, his child would get a bad cold whenever the weather would get cold, but now he's not worried about that because of the Lloyd's amazing heating system. Lloyd was just doing this for himself, so he felt ashamed. The grateful man also tells him that his relative in a nearby estate is interested in Lloyd constructing him a heating system. This is exactly what our protagonist was aiming at, the bigger picture. He'll build a heating system in other estates and then raise the price with the excuse of travel expenses. Javier saw Lloyd showing his dirty look as he was coming up with all of these greedy schemes. In the next scene, Lloyd explains to Javier that because the heating system consumes a lot of wood, that these mountains will become bare. He cancelled the construction of the Appian Road, and at the end of the road they dig up bituminous coal and they're going to sell it at a high price. It's a perfect plan. As he was saying this, Lloyd went full greed mode. If one of his heating systems gets an approval, the others won't be able to resist. Javier thought this was really unfair and just mean, but Lloyd reminded him that this was the only way they can pay off the debt for the estate. Javier agreed and mentioned that the Baron doesn't know anything about the bituminous coal and won't just accept it, and even the other Barons tried doing it but failed. Lloyd knows about this and says that he has a way of doing things with the modern era's excavation technology shield method. For Javier, this is just another thing he knows nothing about. Meanwhile, at the end of the road, where the road work stopped and where they are planning to excavate coal, we can see something in the cave, a huge amount of glowing eyes, some kinds of insects staring menacingly. We see our protagonist imagining some cool skills that would come in handy, like just creating building out of nowhere, but instead the only thing he can do now is slow beam drawings from his finger, which is basically the same as drawings with your hand. And because of what happened with Newman, Lloyd got a 639 new RPs because of his favorable impressions among Baroness, Javier, Bayern and other people, and he used those points to get an upgrade for his skills. We now see Lloyd in front of the cave, thinking of how he can start with the digging, and he uses his now intermediate measurement skill to scan the ground. But this skill does have its limitations, like he's capable only seeing up to 5 meters, but it'll help anyways, he thinks. And now he has a problem. He doesn't know how to dig it up as fast as possible. It would take too long for humans to do it, and Podong is sick from the road excavation he did. And even if he wasn't, it would be rather difficult for him to do it because he's too big. Lloyd thinks of an idea. He could simply use his points to summon another fantasy species. He decides to do just that, and he summons a little cute snake-like creature. At first he starts thinking what this creature could be used for, like is it useful at all, because it's too small. But then he remembers that Podong was like that at first, and now he grows extra big and it's pretty useful. Lloyd asks Little Snake if it grows big and what other skills does it have, to which it just nods. Weeks later we see that Belle, which is that snake's name, Belle can grow big and eat dirt. So they start working on the tunnel in the cave, where Belle creates a tunnel by eating dirt and then using her other skills, pooping the steel. Bros? I mean, this sounds kinda disgusting but very useful when you think about it, if we ignore the fact that it would be extremely painful to do that. Anyways, Javier cuts that steel up and then workers help build a structure that will support the ground. So there are 4 steps in total. Javier wonders why he, an honorable knight, has to cut up the giant snake's poo, but that's just life, I guess. We can see them working really hard despite having lack of air in there. Lloyd thinks so they'd already fall unconscious if they didn't set up a pipe that gives them a bit of air from the outside. Javier suggests Lloyd to take some rest, but Lloyd tells him that he is the person in charge and as such he is responsible for the operation. He thinks of people in charge back in Korea and how they only talk big and don't even show up at the venue, and he makes himself a promise that he'll never be like them and he'll be a responsible man in charge. Now he sees that they reach the bituminous coal and we hear cheers from the excited workers and Lloyd. They finally made it. Our protagonist thanks the snake as he couldn't have done it without her. His next idea is when they arrive at the coal seam to then dismantle the shield that is holding up the ground and expand the space. This will be dangerous, so he tells them to keep their guard up. But as he was saying that, all of a sudden, loud thuds start coming from the end of the shield. Lloyd thinks to himself that the ground here is strong and isn't supposed to collapse. He does his scan thing and finds a hole in there that wasn't there before. And boom, something breaks out, a gigantic ant-like creature. And then they get into a fight with it. Lloyd smacks it on the head with his shovel. He thinks this is surprising as this didn't show up in the novel at all. And then he realizes that if there's one ant, there must be a whole colony of them out there, so he shouldn't be at ease. And just as he was thinking that, a bunch of those gigantic ants start pouring out of the hole. Lloyd starts panicking as he doesn't know what to do now. They are lacking air, so he can't expect Javier to fight them all off on his own. Then Javier slaps our boy up just to get him to his senses. Lloyd thinks of an idea. They'll just attack the ant tunnel. Javier has a bit of suspicion, but he just goes along with it because until now all of the absurd sounding ideas that Lloyd suggested worked. So they go charging in. In the meantime, Lord Baron is notified of what's happening, that monster ants attacked Lloyd and his workers, and that workers are already evacuated, but Lloyd and Javier are still inside, and Baron is already ready to close the mine. Back in the mine, Lloyd and Javier keep smashing through the rows and rows of these giant ants. We see them completely surrounded by ants as Lloyd has his mind set on finding something. He understands that the situation is grave, but they need to keep pushing until they find what he is looking for, which is methane gas layer. Coal is inhabited by methanogens, and because of that, methane gas layers are all over the mineral veins. He thinks that if he could find these, he could blow these ants up and get rid of them. He finally finds it using his scan skill, and he tells Javier that he'll dig for it while Javier keeps the monster ants away. He hectically starts digging while Javier keeps slashing them up. Then in the midst of the epic battle, they hear a huge roar. Even bigger ant shows up, some kind of a boss ant with glowing red eyes. It's the queen and it's really big. The humongous queen ant starts charging at them. Lloyd asks Javier if he could deal with it, but Javier doesn't seem too confident. But as they have no choice, he'll keep fighting. Javier manages to hold it back while our protagonist keeps digging. Digging something out, Lloyd tells Javier that they should now run towards the entrance, a narrow passage they went through earlier. They keep running as the enormous queen ant chases them. They jump through the passage as Lloyd, in a dramatic way, throws his torch through the opening in the passage saying, "Eat this!" And just when the queen ant was about to break through the narrow passage, the flame spreads and there's a huge explosion, blasting the queen ant and everything else in there, while Lloyd and Javier jump for shelter. The men outside, including Baron, hear the explosion. Lloyd's dad screams in desperate voice for Lloyd, but his men stop him from doing anything foolish, as he might get hurt himself if he entered the mine. Inside the mine, we see Lloyd shielded by Javier with his own body. They both survived and the plan seemed to have worked. But now we see that Javier is unconscious, just as Belle is, and the entrance is blocked, and he's running out of oxygen as the notifications come alerting him. Our protagonist realizes that he doesn't have much time, so he scans for the best place to start digging for a way out and starts digging. Javier briefly comes to his senses just to hear words of worry from Lloyd for him and faints again. New window comes up to our protagonist telling him how it admires his tenacity of not giving up on Javier. Then Javier's likability towards him has increased by 6. He got a bunch of more RPs, but we see that his oxygen is depleting fast, so he has to come up with an idea to use those extra points he just got to search for knowledge that can develop skills, because he has nothing to lose anymore anyway. The system starts showing him all kinds of knowledge abilities, like surrounding mana absorption process, mana absorption increase, and system tells him that by combining these skills, he'll be able to acquire the Astrahan core technique, and that seems exactly what Lloyd needs right now. He trained for this skill even after the duel he had with Newman. With the press of a button, he acquires the Astrahan core technique. He thinks this might not be enough because he doesn't have the mana heart yet, but he can always use the rest of his RP to top up his skills in no time, and he does exactly that. The RP requirement increases by 5 whenever it levels up though. He has no choice but to raise it, even if he ends up needing those points for something else. He reaches the 10th level of the first circle, and then it becomes double circle Astrahan core technique, and mana amplifies to 200%. Lloyd is now left with only 7 RPs. He wonders what will happen now that he has double circle. System notifies him of his options. Option skill number 1. Energizer, well, he'll not get tired for the following 10 minutes. Option skill 2. Power Outburst, where his mana amplification will be increased 3 times for the following 20 seconds. It also says that for both of these skills, there's a limit. He can only use this once a day. Lloyd goes for the Energizer skill as he gets a huge burst of energy flowing through his body. He starts digging like a crazy person, desperate to survive. We see him find a hole using his measurement skill, but now it's a matter of minutes before he completely runs out of air, so it's a fight against time. Can he reach the hole before the oxygen depletes? Our protagonist now falls on his knees as his 10 minutes Energizer ended, but he quickly gets up again as he activated the power outburst, and he keeps digging and digging and digging because he's got no more than 20 seconds to reach that hole before power outburst runs out. But it does run out and he falls flat as he ran out of oxygen. Laying there, he thinks to himself how he just wanted a break from his old life. He was actually starting to enjoy this one. And then when all hope was lost, Podong comes crashing through the end Lloyd was digging towards. Let's go, Podong! Yo, I'm starting to like these little hamster bros. Ooh! Lloyd sees it and gives a big grin, finally getting some air. He gets up again and motivates himself by telling himself that relaxed life of a noble son is waiting for him. Meanwhile, Baron is now in the mine with few of his men looking for Lloyd and Javier. In the distance, he sees Lloyd carrying Javier and comes running towards him in relief that his son survived such a dangerous situation. We also learn from the system that because Lloyd was able to overcome the limits of his body through extraordinary skills during extreme situations, he's skilled up by another new skill called Power Mode, where even when he's extremely exhausted, traces of Astrahan core technique will still remain. The next day, story starts going around how Lloyd prioritized his worker's life and acted like a true hero and a man of honor. He stayed with Javier to get rid of the monster ants. People's perception definitely changed for the better. Now we see Lloyd talking with Javier sitting next to him, and a message from the system pops up telling him that everyone is deeply impressed with his heroic acts and that because of it he'll be rewarded a large amount of RPs as a bonus for his great achievement. He's got 507 RPs now and he's extremely happy. Few weeks later, the works continued in the mines. Things are starting to look really really good now, and we see our protagonist walking in the mines accompanied by his trusty knight Javier, and we see the other workers looking at him in admiration, greeting him and thanking him for his hard work, and saying that he's a true noble, unlike the others. He understands how being a noble entails responsibility. He's their hero because he fought for their lives. He feels the pressure but accepts the praises. Even though things are going smoothly, he can't allow anything bad to happen ever again. He thinks to himself that he needs to prioritize safety, especially during times like these. He needs to identify even the smallest risk factor and avoid it. They are still looking for the ant tunnel, so Javier asks him why he does this by himself. He could just send a worker in to do it for him. Why would he expose himself to such a danger? Javier seems still reluctant to believe that Lloyd would care about the worker's safety. Lloyd just tells him that he's an idiot and that of course he should be the one responsible for the dangerous work, because in that way they won't see anything even if he spends a lot of money. Hearing that explanation, Javier felt undecided on how he should see this, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, so his favorable impression stays the same. They come to an end and Javier suggests that they should go back, but with his supervision, Lloyd sees that it's hollow on the other side and that they should dig through just in case there are some ant eggs. After digging through, there was something strange to be seen. There was a green orc-looking like person tied up in some kind of web, surrounded by lots of pigs, also wrapped in the web. Javier thought that it looked dangerous and that he should deal with it, but Lloyd told him he's reckless, and they had a back and forth discussion about what this is. Was it an orc or something else? Is it dead? Javier says that it probably isn't dead because he heard that monster ants usually store their prey by paralyzing it. Our protagonist, with a wide grin, realizes that this might be a great gain for him. A little later, we see the orc introducing himself and expressing his gratitude to his savior, Lloyd. His name is Horochi. The orc keeps saying kek at the end of his sentences, so Lloyd kinda teases him about it. Now bros, let me tell you an origin of kek. You probably heard it before. People often use it on the internet instead of saying lol. So it originates from the World of Warcraft game. There are two different factions in it, Alliance and Horde has orcs. And when you're playing an Alliance player and an Orc player writes lol, you don't see lol because it's a different language and you see kek. So that's the origin of kek, and this is a reference to that because Orc saying kek, we are humans seeing kek, it means lol. Horochi is the son of an Orc tribe leader, the tribe of Steel Sand. He says that he'll do anything for our protagonist for saving him, which is exactly what Lloyd expected. Just then, with a ready answer, Lloyd tells the orc that he'll need 120 orcs to help him in the mine. But Horochi refuses. The orc tells Lloyd that orcs can only follow warriors' commands, and that even if he gave him his orcs, they wouldn't obey him because he's not a warrior. We learn that orcs are really tough. In their tribe, they are required to go to the wild and bring the head of a monster ant once you become an adult. Horochi made a mistake by going to the ant tunnel and he got paralyzed. So Horochi tells Lloyd that he failed at becoming an adult because he didn't get the monster ant's head. But Lloyd tells congratulations to him anyways and tells him that they caught it together, displaying the ant head on the wall. Horochi, however, says that he can't remember catching such a big ant. Our protagonist, with a cunning expression on his face, tells him that he can't remember, probably because he got paralyzed, and that actually even the queen ant said that she couldn't believe she lost to a young orc. While he was saying all this, Javier was just standing behind, looking slightly disturbed, listening to these fake stories. So then Lloyd goes on to say that they are both excellent warriors. After all, they were even praised by the Ant Queen herself. After he convinced Horochi in his made-up story, he again asked him for 120 orcs, on what the orc agreed with excitement as he now saw himself as a warrior. 1 week later, Lloyd visits the village of the Steel Sand Orc tribe to ask for orcs to work for him. He gets rejected there as well because the chief orc says that they are not capable for this work because they need to eat a lot of meat to maintain their muscle strength, and they can't have a lot of meat if they don't hunt regularly, and they won't be able to do it if they start working in the mines. And the loss of muscles means the collapse of their tribe, and they can't let that happen by letting the number of warriors reduce. But Lloyd, after giving it some thought, comes up with a possible solution. If the meat doesn't go bad after a few days, then they won't have to go out hunting for 3 shifts, and then they'll be able to land some workers. The orc chief confirms this, but questions how they'll do this. Lloyd just says that if they find a way to stop the meat from going bad even after a few days, it'll work. We learned that these orcs are pretty special. They are really strong because all of their culture is about strength and fighting to the degree that even when they celebrate, they do it with workouts. Lloyd thinks that having this power will increase their productivity tenfold, but he also noticed that they have a lot of valuable things like gold and treasure, but they just treat it as an exercise equipment. They seem not to be aware, or they don't care about the real value of the treasure they've got. This is why Lloyd actually made the tribe leader sign a contract to get both the workers and the treasures. Now we see Lloyd and Javier discussing about what they need to do to make this deal work. They need to make a stone coal storage, and Javier is unfamiliar with this. So our protagonist tells him that it's something like what wizards use in the royal family, where they preserve food with ice magic. So the cold storage is something like a building where they can do the same thing without the help of the magic. Javier wonders how he knows all this, but Lloyd just dismisses it by saying that he learned it from a circle and he feels too lazy to explain why there are so many things Javier doesn't know about. He quickly changes the topic by listing all the things they'll need to make this storage. They need granite, which is very strong and kinda difficult to get. Lloyd's understanding is that he doesn't have any dynamites to get the granite, so he thinks of using Javier as a human dynamite. Our protagonist got this idea from one of the main episodes of this novel, where in the place called Nemram, a city trapped inside the magical barrier, and inside the city there were thousands of refugees that Javier needed to save. At that level, Javier was already at the level of the Sword Master and had a 4th mana circle inscribed on his mana heart. But he was helpless and he had no choice but to watch the refugees' mana being sucked out of them. Javier was ready to save them even at the cost of his life, and in that moment, with that kind of passion, the skill of lethal movement was created without knowing it. The remaining 3 circles collided and Javier produced such a force that it ripped open the magic barrier. This became a technique that represented the Knight of Iron and Blood along with Asrahan Mind technique. So Lloyd brought that technique up with Javier, pretending that he just came up with it, but Javier wasn't buying it. With a bit of back and forth, our protagonist convinced him to try it. So Javier approached the rock and started doing it. He needs to protect his mana heart with 1 circle while moving the remaining 3 circles, and he managed to do it with first try. He released a huge blast with his sword, making a hole in the rock and also completely destroying his clothes. Javier was pleased with this idea working, so he suggested Lloyd also try it. Windows started popping up saying Javier is thankful, and his favorable impression of Lloyd went up by 3, and his total RPs are at 561 now. But still, Javier says that he's a knight and that his swordsmanship was supposed to be used for protecting the Lord, and now he's using it for construction works. Since then, it didn't take a lot of time for the construction to be finished. The granite that Javier split and trimmed was carried by the giant Podong, and the orcs that are gym maniacs, without even being asked, worked on their own. So Lloyd thought with all this going about, the work will be completed 5 times faster. So all they needed now is ice and insulation. At that moment, Lloyd noticed that the workers he ordered to bring the insulation materials still didn't come back, and it's been some time. To be exact, it's been 3 weeks. They should have come back by now, but they haven't, so it's either because they are lazy or they had an accident. Lloyd got up to investigate it, but Javier stopped him, saying that he'll do it himself as they don't know what kind of accident it is and it might be too much for Lloyd. Lloyd retorted back that they already had a discussion about this and that he takes himself to be in charge of the construction and so that he also carries responsibilities for the workers. Javier had no choice but to sigh and accept his master's decision. After some time investigating the area, they came across their special gloves that they custom made for the insulation, but no workers to be seen anywhere. Then Javier notices something weird towards the direction of the canyon, so he told Lloyd about it. He kept on saying that the flow of the mana is unusual there, it's not accurate because it's too subtle. Lloyd wasn't sure what he was talking about, but he was trying to remember the novels and if there's anything there he can remember. Then all of a sudden, as it dawned on him, he remembered something from one of the episodes in the novel. So he told Javier that they should immediately go, that they had no time. And with a concern in his face and his voice, he said that all of their soldiers already might be dead. After looking around and investigating, they come across some kind of a cave which they call Ruffelin's dungeon, and our protagonist recalls that this was the place that was targeted by Javier at the very beginning of the novel. It was the hideout of a dark mage called Ruffelin. Bros, what's with these names? Ruffelin, Javier, Thrower. Can you just give a simple name like Lin, Jin, Min? Come on, man. At this point, Lloyd gets furious, thinking how could that guy lay his hands on his men? That's a violation of private property rights and that's a literal sin. Without thinking much, Javier starts entering the cave and accidentally steps into a trap, and just when the trap was about to go off, Lloyd pulls Javier back, saving him from a huge explosion. Lloyd asks him if he really is a knight, because a knight would assume something like this would happen and would be more careful. But as a matter of fact, Lloyd remembers that in the novel, Javier does get caught in this first trap and then he entered the cave being injured. Lloyd suggests him to use his mana technique that he used to observe this place before. We learn that mana naturally has a constant concentration in the atmosphere, and in that way it's possible to find out where the magical traps are placed, basically by finding unnatural concentrations of mana. So understanding this, Javier takes the lead. Javier starts thinking about his whole suspicion of Lloyd and how it's almost like he knows exactly what'll happen next before it actually happens. He doesn't feel any particularly special energy about Lloyd, but maybe it could be some more powerful mana. But he realizes that thinking about this is secondary to saving soldiers and that he should stay focused. Now we see a man in a black cloak holding a book, and he seems to have noticed that one of the traps was activated. We learn that the soldiers are safe for now, but are kidnapped, and the cloaked man is preparing for some sort of an experiment. He goes into one of the cells and grabs one of his prisoners by hair and drags him to a red circle drawn on the floor as the prisoners scream in agony and fear for someone to save them. The cloaked guy goes on to say that this is the circle of magic that connects to hell, and he's holding Grim Reaper's scythe soaked with blood for 100 days, and he's got a young man. Everything is prepared for a ritual, and as he swung his scythe and was about to slash the prisoner with it, Lloyd shouts at him to stop. The cloaked guy turns in surprise as he didn't expect them to come this far, as there are over hundreds of traps set out there. The cloaked guy summons some kind of magic with his hand and creates a huge wall around them and releases some kind of gas, thinking it will put them to sleep with it. Lloyd takes a huge breath of air before the gas reaches him and turns on his energizer skill. Then he starts digging. He's so fired up. Even sleeping pills don't quite work on Lloyd, so this might not do him any damage. Javier thinks to himself that Lloyd digging looks like a ground mole and that he might use this as a joke to make fun of him. Meanwhile, Lloyd invites him into the hole he dug so that he can use his new technique and blast the other end of the ground, which he does. He creates an explosion that opens up the ground on the other side of the wall where the cloaked guy is, and they catch him by surprise. The cloaked guy, now cornered, summons up a huge monster and says that even they won't be able to even scratch this creature's skin because it's so hard, it's like steel. Just when Lloyd started saying that this might be difficult, Javier says that he can see his weakness and leaps towards the monster, cutting him in half, with ease with a move called Cut-in Blast Wave. The cloaked guy gets utterly petrified after seeing this, and even Lloyd is surprised as he thinks this is a new way he's using his skill. He's using the blast as a driving force, and he doesn't recall Javier using any such technique in the novel. The cloaked guy now realizes who is he facing, and he understands that no matter what he does, he cannot beat them. At that moment, Lloyd approaches him and asks how he can repay them, considering that he kidnapped his soldiers and the construction work had to be delayed. Rufilan, being afraid for his life, begs for forgiveness, but Lloyd isn't interested in any of that. He just wants him to compensate for what he did. Rufilan offers all of the valuable magic items which he has there. Lloyd accepts the offer, and in the meantime, Javier is helping the exhausted prisoners out, but thankfully all of them are fine, which wouldn't be the case if they came a moment later. Lloyd questions the cloaked man about why is he doing the rituals. Rufilan says that he was researching on how to bring back the dead to life, and he was doing it so that he can bring back his dead wife and a child. He tells him that he used to work as a wizard in the Lord's manor, and he had an ordinary and happy life until the Lord he served suddenly tried to take his wife away from him. So he had no choice but to try running away with his family, and the Lord pursued him. And just as he was to continue his story, Lloyd stopped him as he wasn't really interested that much. He didn't think of him nicely. Just to save his wife, he was willing to kill hundreds of innocent people. Lloyd asks him what he thinks about the men he sacrificed, what he thought of their happiness and their family's happiness. Did any of that matter to him? The story the cloaked guy told him doesn't make him feel sorry for him, and no matter what he says, his true nature will never change. A nature of a guy who completely destroyed happy families. He can only be labeled as a killer. As he said all of this, tears started going down the Rufilan's eyes. Our protagonist tells him that he'll come back with more men later to pick up the tools, and if he does anything bad again, he won't forgive him. The cloaked man thanks him, not thinking this would happen. Lloyd saw in the novel that Javier forgave Rufilan as well, and then he left the dungeon. And in the novel, Rufilan further killed hundreds of people and reinforced himself as a really sick and annoying villain that fought with Javier many times later. And even though he was showing his back like that, he knew what would happen next. As he turned, Rufilan already summoned up a powerful magic ready to attack, but as he did, Javier swung his sword and cut Rufilan's head off. Then our protagonist recalled his previous life, where he used to be teased and bullied by one of his superiors at the construction site, and our protagonist just took it as it is. He kept bending over backward to accommodate the piece, thinking that if he tries to resist it, it'll only escalate further, and one conflict will lead into the next, and he'll just get too much. So he kept playing the bully's game, letting himself being bullied and being called all kinds of horrific names. He kept telling to himself that good things are good and that he has to avoid conflict, and that one fight leads to the next, and that if he acts politely, this other guy will change too. So he kept putting up with it, and the other guy just took him as an easy pushover. He kept holding it in and holding it in until one day he just snapped and beat the other guy so hard he almost killed him. He beat him so hard that he thought that he was doomed. But guess what? What actually happened is that an actual peace had come. From that day on, the other guy didn't bother him anymore. So Lloyd learned that there are times when violence must be stopped. In Korea, criminals committing heinous crimes get light punishment because of their human rights. But shouldn't villains receive punishment befitting villains, he thinks. On their way back, Lloyd noticed one of his workers being too exhausted, so he asked him to carry his backpack for him. Backpacks were heavy with items from the cave. The worker was reluctant as he thought it's not befitting of a noble to carry his backpack for him. But Lloyd, in his typical way, hiding his good intention behind some fake self-interest, told him that if he collapses, he'll have to carry him and his backpack too. And then he went on to take everyone's backpacks. They were all reluctant to allow for this happening, but he threatened them with taking away their bonus if they keep nagging him about it, so they had no choice but to let him carry their backpacks for them. Javier was puzzled by this, as he didn't know if it was genuinely about backpacks or for the sake of the soldiers. But right now it doesn't matter to the soldiers. In their eyes they see him as a trustworthy leader and admire him. The system tells Lloyd that soldiers are deeply moved by his acts and that they'll spread the story of it. He should feel rewarded. But our protagonist says he doesn't care about a reward of that kind. He just wants money. In the next scene, we see that they completed the stone cold storage. Hirochi says that it's a little less hot than outside, so he doesn't see how this will prevent meat from going bad. Lloyd tells him that that's because there's no ice in it. Hirochi gets a bit confused, but Lloyd explains that they can just make some ice. The orc gets a bit suspicious of Lloyd and his whole story, but quickly remembers that he is his savior and he has to trust him. Then Hirochi tells him that if he needs any help, just to ask him, and he goes his way. Javier, listening to this conversation, gets curious too, and so he asks Lloyd how does he actually plan to make the ice. But Lloyd just turns around and with an expression of someone who doesn't know what he's doing, says that he's not sure. Javier asks him, because he already signed a contract with them and has no plan, is he trying to scam them? Our protagonist explains to him with a motivational speech about the characteristics of a failure, saying that if you think you can do something, it won't take you anywhere. You have to give it a try. You have to find a way to do it somehow. A person who succeeds opens up and tries, and that's what innovation is, and that's entrepreneur's mindset. Javier is not convinced though. He thinks there's a big chance of a failure. After some time, we see Lloyd alone, sitting outside in a deep thought, thinking of strategies on how he could make this work out. They first would have to make a giant ice cube. He can use Podong and Bell to scoop the water from the lake, and then there is ice magic in this world, but he needs to figure out the principle behind it. How does it actually work? Magic, using one's mana freely, changing the mana's arrangement freely. He thinks it could be achieved with mana absorption training every day. There are various kinds of natural manas, and with that, changing it is magic's nature. But right now he can't use his mana as he wants, so it's a little bit tricky. Next day he actually did try out what he thought of. He made Podon and Bell carry the water and then pour it into the cube shapes made out of stone. Then he used his Asrahan mind technique to take up all of the heat from the water, cause in that way only cold energy will be left in the water. But it wasn't as easy to do it. While he was at it, Javier observed him and thought that Lloyd is actually being responsible. He's actually doing what he said he'd do. He's trying his best to find a way for this to work. In the meantime, the system pops up telling our protagonist that he developed a new skill with Asrahan mind technique. Few days later, we see the chief orc and his son Hirochi in the stone cold storage freezing. Lloyd made the ice, and now the only thing he needs to do is to put it in the insulation. The orcs are really happy about this news, because now they won't have to throw the meat anymore, and they don't have to hunt every day too. They propose a celebration, and Lloyd just looks at Javier with an expression of "I told you so," and Javier looks back at him approvingly. Entrepreneur mindset actually worked this time, bros. At the Steel Sand Tribe village, the orcs express their gratitude to Lloyd, but Lloyd just says that he was following what's in the contract. And now, our protagonist has officially acquired 120 orc workers. The orc chief Achua tells him that for orcs it's different. For them it's not just a contract. They are doing it out of gratitude. And then he pronounces an alliance between Lloyd, his family, and Steel Sand Tribe, which is an equivalent to blood relationship. Then they go off chanting in dramatic unison that they declare that Frontera is their friend and that Frontera's enemy is their enemy. If they are in trouble, they help them at any time. At that moment, the system pops up saying that the tribe accepted him as a true friend and that he can increase his affinities with the RPs he got from the orcs. He got 100 bonus RPs for opening up the tribe, and right now he's got 611 RPs. Our protagonist is really happy with gaining such an ally. Then he went back with 120 muscular orcs, which causes a bit of a shock in the village as people saw orcs negatively as some scary monsters. So Lloyd thought of releasing some kind of an official letter reassuring people of their safety. Even the Baron, who knew about the arrangement, when seeing them in person he froze up. Again the system came up, saying that the beautiful story of conquering the magician and saving the soldiers is spread throughout the estate, and all the people of the estate are praising him, and because of that he got plus 300 RP for social achievement. Later he went to check those magic items he got from Rufilan, the magician, just to see if there's anything useful before he sells it. As he was investigating a magic book, he realized something. He quickly got up and told Javier to take care of the items while he's away. He needs to go to the mine for some reason. He was in a big rush, running like crazy. When he got to the mine, he was looking for Throdes, the guy that owed him money. After finding him, he told him that he was actually joking about the contract, him working for 520 years to fulfill the contract, because it's impossible. He won't live that long. Our protagonist now had a different idea on his mind. He showed him the book where it talks about how to revive a corpse. While Throats was looking all exhausted from work and confused by what Lloyd was talking about, Lloyd tells him that with that book, he can actually now work for the whole 520 years. Lloyd tells Throats to cheer up because it's the good news, and he gets a funny notification from the system that the King of the Hell is thrilled by his personality and is considering hiring him. Lloyd then went to look for Baron as he had something to discuss with him, but he didn't find him in his room where he usually is, and the servants told him that the Baron is in the reception room because some guests came. It's Mr. Sahilo and Meatloaf. As if thought of something evil, Lloyd's face got all sinister looking. Back in the reception room, the guests tell Baron that they're expecting him to pay some principal repayment and that they'll accept 10% this time if the Baron gives them the ownership of the mine. Right when the Baron was stuck and didn't have a response for them, Lloyd starts knocking on the door. He comes in looking all cheerful. The loners, looking a bit uncomfortable with him, remembering their last encounter, show him the paper permit so that he cannot threaten them again. Lloyd tells them that he overheard their suggestion, but that he has his own offer if they'll accept it. They rejected the offer, but Lloyd anyways told them. He said that in the future, they'll be paying their debt little by little and with lower interest afterwards. Loners insisted on not hearing his suggestion, which made Lloyd invite his friend Orc, because it wouldn't be fair for them to make suggestion and not to allow him to do the same. Upon seeing the angry Orc, the two loan sharks got really scared. Orc made a threat to them, saying that if they make Frontera suffer, he'll destroy them. And then Lloyd followed up that if they reject his proposition, he'll get hurt, and the Orc, in a really dramatic way, said if they hurt Lloyd, he'll hurt them. Next we see loan sharks running away from the palace. We can guess that they had to accept the offer. Lloyd tells Baron that he wanted to cancel the debt, but that wouldn't be lawful. But this new agreement should help them, and also that heating system construction is expanding and the mining of bituminous coal is going great. With all that, they'll be able to repay the debt in no time. He hands in the new contract to Baron and tells him to keep it safe, and then tells him that they might have a bit of a problem because orcs eat 10 times more than ordinary people and they really need them. Baron gets all worried now, and as expected, orcs turned out to be great miners. Some of them have been mining for 24 hours, so they had to take him out of the mine by force. Their productivity is 10 times higher than what our protagonist originally expected, and even their stamina and muscle strength is beyond his imagination. They don't even want to receive any money for their work as long as they can get fed until they are full. That might turn out to be a problem, so Lloyd straight away starts thinking about the ways they can get that much meat. He thinks they should start increasing the tax and get more meat with that money. Baron is worried that their people might not be able to afford it. That would be too much tax for them, he thinks. But Lloyd has an idea about how to raise the tax. They just need to have people earn more money. First, they'll turn the Maris wetland into a farm and then give it to the people. They can then farm as much as they want, and in that way they can earn a lot. And then they'd be able to pay more taxes. Next, we see Lloyd and Javier visiting the wetlands. Javier says that it's been hundreds of years since this land was abandoned, and he thinks that they might not be able to farm there. Lloyd just pretends that he's got an idea, but he knows this won't be easy. He spends next couple of days trying to create a structure for the rainwater to drain neatly, and he kept trying on doing this for the next 21 days, not resting and not even eating properly. Javier wanted to stop him, but the Baron told him not to. Baron explains that he used to hate him even though he was his father, but now he's changed and now he's struggling for the sake of the people. Baron says that he might not be able to help him, but he won't stand in his way. Javier agrees with the decision and adds that Lloyd seems to never give up. Notifications tell Lloyd that Baron's favorable impression of him was increased. Lloyd keeps working on it, thinking that he can't give up now, knowing that he'll be able to raise taxes and eventually earn more money. It's just worth the struggle, no matter how difficult it is. He needs to make the water drain properly. And also, this hardly compares to when he had to work all-nighters and work part-time jobs. And just when he was thinking this, he gets a new notification. He opened a new window skill option, Simulation Mode. He can literally manipulate simulations, which is so useful. He then gets into a discussion with the system about the wish our protagonist originally had. He just says that his wish was to graduate from college, to get a license and work in a good company where he'll make good money. But the system tells him that that was his goal and that his wish is much more than that. It transcends time and space. Lloyd says he's busy, and then he tells Podon and Belle that they have to scoop out all the water in the wetlands and throw it away. However, Podon and Belle don't take this nicely, but Lloyd wonders if they can actually do it. So he then decides to use all of his RP to draw as many fantasy species as possible, and since the price goes up for every new draw, he can only make 4. It has to be something as big as Podon and Belle. The first creature in the form of a yellow ball comes out and hits Lloyd straight in the face. It's a hippo looking like thingy. Belle and Podon seem to enjoy the new company. Lloyd asks if the hippo can show him the instructions of what he can do, and he discovers that hippo doesn't grow even if it got fed with sunflower seeds. He wonders if he failed this time. Our protagonist wasn't happy at all with the fantasy creature that he got this time, so he asked the system if he couldn't try drawing again. But the system told him that he could only draw 1 per day. Even the little guy took offense to this and was angry at Lloyd for saying this. Lloyd told him that it's just that he's not too useful for the work they need. But it turns out that the little hippo does have one neat skill. He can absorb moisture in one shot. Lloyd was curious about this ability, so he asked him to show it. Hippo just approached water and started drinking. As he drank it, he was getting bigger and bigger, and finally he drank all the water from the spot. He sucked it dry, and by the end of it he was enormous. He drank such an enormous amount in such a short time, and with this speed, Lloyd thought that they could finish the job in just few days. The other 2 creatures felt proud of their little friend. Lloyd now was a little bit curious if these creatures were really at random, cause he seems to be getting the exact abilities that he needs, so he asked the system about it. The system tells him that it's actually one of the skills that he must have gotten, the ability to draw with luck. I mean, probably even the system wasn't sure about this. Lloyd then thought that Hippo could drink more water, so he told him to do so, because that way they'd already be able to start with the construction by tomorrow. The idea is for the hippo to remove the water from the wetlands and then to spit that water in the river so that he can become small again. Then remove the grass roots and plant remains from the ground. After that, Javier will blast holes in the ground where they'll insert bamboo poles. Then they'll have Podong press the ground. After that, use Hippo's one-shot ability to drain water from the bamboo poles, and then build a more sophisticated bank using Lloyd's simulation skill. Working hard like that, they managed to complete one section in 10 days, but they still have a long way to go. This place is already taking the shape of a farmland, and just when Javier had a minor crisis about his purpose as a protector, Lloyd tells him to plant the seeds, and in this way he's protecting the estate by driving out the pests. Both Baron and Baroness can't believe what amazing progress their son achieved in such a little time. The wetlands already looked like proper rice fields. The system tells our protagonist that the people of Frontera show admiration for all the miracles he's created, and because of this he's getting awarded a huge amount of RPs, and Lloyd couldn't be happier. Things are going exactly how he wants them to. Next we see Javier watering the plants, not really being in his element because he's a warrior after all. Lloyd joins him and tells him that they only need to build a water wheel to complete the construction. The water wheel will prevent wetlands from submerging in case of rain. While they were having a chit-chat, a group of men with horses approached them, and it was a Viscount Lacona that lives to the north of the Mares wetland. A representative that was next to the Viscount asked about who's in charge of the construction. As it turns out, this land is Viscount Lacona's land, and that they should leave the place as soon as possible. Although this land was deserted for centuries, this land is under the jurisdiction of Viscount Lacona of the north, while the southern area is the land of Frontera. It seems that Viscount had planned to take this land once it turned into a fertile land without him lifting a finger. Lloyd, realizing this, tells the representative that he shouldn't get involved as this is a conversation between nobles, and then he proceeds to give a proper introduction of himself. The Viscount says that he's heard of his reputation as having an indecent behavior and he has nothing to talk about with him, and that he should call his father instead. But Lloyd just pretends not to hear him and makes a joke on his expense, which the stuck-up Viscount doesn't get at first. As the Viscount was figuring out the joke, our protagonist all of a sudden starts reciting the law concerned with the cultivation of the wasteland. According to this law, he has the right to establish an ownership of the land that's been neglected for a long time if he cultivates it and makes it useful. Viscount is not pleased with this, so he protests Lloyd's reciting him the law, but Lloyd just keeps going. The wasteland that has been left unattended for 100 years refers to a land in which no residence or cultivation took place. Next, the land that meets the requirements of each of the following is recognized as owned by the developer who cultivated the wasteland. And to finish this awesome presentation off, Lloyd tells him that this is now a land developed by investing funds and labor, and that it can be a land where residential structures can be built, and it is a land where long-term agricultural acts are possible. And finally, just as he was pulling one of the vegetables from the land, it is decided by detailed rules once the crops can be harvested in the land. Viscount was absolutely furious. How could this punk know so much and be so prepared? Our protagonist just smiled and congratulated him for seeing the first harvest in the history of Mares wetland. Javier, listening to this, realized what Lloyd meant when he said that him helping with the seeds will get rid of the pests. He understood now who the pests are. Lloyd then handed the harvest as a gift to the Viscount and in a serious tone asked him to leave his territory. My bro Lloyd just turned Giga Chad bros. The Viscount, even more angry, being humiliated like that, left the territory. Javier approached Lloyd and asked him how did he know that these people would be coming. Lloyd explained that they've seen these trash people in the past, always trying to take advantage of other people's efforts. Then people started cheering our protagonist, saying that he saved the lands. Lloyd, being uncomfortable with the compliments, just told him that they won't get any payment if they don't continue working. Now, sometime after, we see our protagonist looking over the wetlands during the rain, checking if the wetlands is really a usable land and if his plan actually worked. Even though he used the simulation hundreds of times, he shouldn't let his guard down. He needed to make sure that the drainage system works properly. The window comes up saying that he did a monumental construction achievement and that he left a clear trace of civil engineering in the continent of Laurasia, and because of this he gets a large amount of skill experience as a reward. And he even gets an increase of favorable impression from a bunch of people. Meanwhile, in Lacona Viscounty, the Viscount is not giving up from the land. He's seeking the ways he can get his land back. He wants some workshop supervisor to get involved. A few days later, Lloyd just woke up with a headache, which he didn't have before, but he didn't give it much thought because he had to work. But he wasn't the only one. Javier says that he also has a strong, unusual headache. Our protagonist now realizes something. Could it really be that? We see that other residents, including animals of the estates, are dealing with the same problem. They all have some sort of a headache. Our protagonist realizes that it has to be the water. Something in the water is poisoning them, but he's not sure what, as he didn't read about it in the novel. He considers his strongest weapon to be the information, which is why he could have predicted and prevented so many things. But because of the events taken with the monster ants, he learned that there is information that wasn't in the novel. So he had to figure it out and figure out what's happening with water on his own now. As he was expecting Viscount Lacona to cross the reclaimed Mares land, he had to dig up some information about them. And he found out that the main source of income for the Lacana estate is because of their mysterious dyeing technique. And then, just as he was thinking of what fruits they use for dyeing, a thought came to his mind. It has to be that bastard Lacona, he did something. In the meantime, Viscount Lacona's representative was already having a meeting with the Baron. He was basically blackmailing him, telling him that if they don't give up half of the reclaimed Mares land, they won't stop releasing the dyed wastewater. Baron, hearing this blatant blackmail, tells the representative that he'll take them to court. But the representative just smiles and tells him that they would probably win the case, but that it would take a long time and a lot of money. Would they be able to finance that and also deal with the polluted water for such a long time? Baron, in a burst of passion, says that he won't give up even an inch of the land. After all, his people's blood, sweat and tears were put into it, and he has no right to give it to lowly men like Lacona. And just as the representative was escorting himself out, all self-satisfied, he gets smacked by the opening doors through which Lloyd was coming in. And not noticing the hurt representative, he goes straight to the Baron to tell him that he figured out what their parasitic neighbors did and what they can do about it as a countermeasure. Representative was offended by being called a parasite, so he retorts, but Lloyd just acts all disgusted and tells him that he didn't know how parasites could understand human language. And this gets him even more riled up, so the representative tells him that as a knight he won't be taking any more insults, draws out his sword and points it at Lloyd. He challenges Lloyd to a duel, and just a few moments later we see Lloyd battering poor representative with a shovel, even after the desperate shouts from the representative that he lost and that he gives up. Even after Lloyd finished smacking the representative with the shovel, he gave him a few more just because he was rude in front of the Baron. This is the first time we see Baron being excited and this proud of his son, even after he saw him giving the representative some extra shovel smacks after the fight ended. He seemed to stop caring about the knight honor at the moment, and understandably so. In the next scene, we see the representative all bruised up in front of the Viscount, who is yelling at him for not being able to do his job properly. He was only supposed to threaten the Baron, but he came back all beaten up. Then he thought that they actually might use this situation to their advantage and extend the court battle to up to 4 years, which will definitely make Baron give up this case. In the meantime, as if overhearing the Viscount, our protagonist is predicting their plan to a dot and is hyping up his people to deal with them in their own way. They can't allow these people with devilish greed from taking advantage of them. The The land is covered in their blood and sweat, and they need to protect it. First, to take care of the immediate water problem, they'll have to make a reservoir. Before the water gets contaminated, they'll use Hippo's skill to procure it. Javier remarks that even though this sounds like a decent plan, him and his creatures won't be able to rest. Then Lloyd tells him that this will just be a temporary measure, but for the longer term, they'll need to build a water supply and make a waterway from the Capua River in the eastern mountain range to their estate. Our protagonist knows this will be a deficit for them, but eventually they'll earn plenty from the construction. A few months later, we see Viscount Lacona being all worried about the situation because he's not sure what's happening. How is it that Frontera's still doing well? And at that moment he's told that eldest son of Frontera's family visited him with an offer to help him with his situation. At first reluctant, Viscount agrees to speak with him. Lloyd lets Viscount know that he's aware that his dye workshop is failing and that he can help saving it. Viscount realizes that it was Lloyd that destroyed his dye workshop. Our protagonist explains Viscount that it was a long journey. Because of the Viscounts wasting all of the water, they had to get the water all the way from the Capua River. He also learned that the water from Lacona's estate was being wasted purposely, so they dug the ground from the river to their estate. Lacona was a bit impatient, trying to get to the point, but Lloyd just kept on explaining as it was leading to the point. He then continued that they came across a huge valley standing in the middle of the pathway, and they had no other choice but to build a Roman-style bridge to support water. The Viscount was growing more annoyed as he couldn't see the point of any of this. How does any of this have to do with the dye workshop not doing well? At that point, Lloyd tells him that it was an accident how they, while working on their project, discovered that the valley water flows in the direction of Viscount's workshop. The limestones that were falling from above as they worked were turning Lacona's fabric into a poop color. Upon hearing this, Viscount gets up from his chair and tells Lloyd that he'll sue him. Our protagonist just smiles and hits him with his own words that if he does it, it'll take at least 2 years for the decision to come down, and that in that time there won't be anyone left to remember his products. Now Viscount Lacona was exploding with anger. Lloyd just calmly got up and told him that his job is done here and that he'll be leaving now. As he was leaving, the Viscount kept shouting threats and insults at him, saying that he knows important people at the royal palace and that he'll get back at him, and so on. On their way back to the estate, Javier gets curious about why Lloyd provoked the Viscount to get even more angry. They both know that the Viscount has connections at the capital, and if this ends up in the court, it'll just cost them loads of money, but Lloyd, with a confident smirk on his face, just tells him that they'll see who gets the bigger loss. 1 month later, at the Frontera's estate, we see Viscount Lacona prostrating in front of our protagonist, apologizing and begging him to save his workshop. Lloyd says he's not interested in words and says that pride isn't worth that much if you can't sell it, so he doesn't care that the Viscount is humiliating himself like that. What Lloyd is interested in is the contract. He just wants Viscount to sign a contract on water supply conditions. After he signs the contract, his workshop will be constructed in a week. When he read it, Viscount realizes that this contract is about him paying for the water he'll get, so he starts complaining that water shouldn't be that expensive. Our protagonist, with an annoyed expression on his face, tells him that that's the exact thing he learned from him, that water is not free, and with that he leaves the Viscount speechless. Next we see the Baron reading the contract and just being surprised that they'll get that much money every month. He thinks with that much money they'll be able to sell all of their interests and still be left with so much. Lloyd, pretending innocent, tells him that it's all thanks to the Viscount being such a good person. Javier understands the situation and that the Viscount first started the fight and how much is better for them now. But he can't help but think that Lloyd is looking more like a devil. And bros, this is my thought exactly. I bet this manhwa ends by Lloyd out-tricking the devil himself and becoming the new devil in this world. And that's just capitalism for you, I guess. The contract never specified the deadline, which means that he'll be draining Viscount until his death. And even after he's dead, he'll be taking his money generation after generation. Lloyd was making some nasty face, thinking about all this, when the Baron told him he's got some good news for him. Because he has a lot of treasure that he got from the orc tribe, the Baron found a guy that would purchase it at a good price. Lloyd pushed back a bit by saying that if it's that much money, he could buy new treasure in an instant. The Baron says he's not sure why, but it has something to do with him putting up a bronze statue. The next scene shows the trade city Cremo, and there Count Cremo standing, gazing through the window when a huge red creature comes out of the water right in front of the city. Count Cremo looks concerned. Now we see Javier discussing the business in the Lacona territory's capital with the Baron. Javier tells him what Lloyd told him about how they'll go about it. He also notices a concern in the Baron's voice, so he reassures him that he'll keep an eye on his son and that he doesn't need to worry about it. The Baron tells him that he feels confident in Lloyd and his strategies and he'll follow his lead. He says that it's only because of Lloyd and his people's efforts that he was able to muster up the courage to reject the initial offer proposed by the representative of the Viscount. If it was his past self, he'd already sign it in fear, since he believes himself to be an indecisive and incapable person. But Javier stops him there and tells him that he doesn't think of him that way. He thinks he's kinder than anyone else he knows and that he cares about others, and we get to see a scene where it seems that the Baron actually saved Javier when he was just a boy. The Baron expresses his appreciation for Javier's nice words, but he says that that is not enough to be called a good feudal lord. Leaders must have strong beliefs and behavioral abilities just like Lloyd has now. Javier just disappointingly thinks how Lloyd's beliefs is money and that's about it. But then he stops himself and questions him, thinking that having money as a motivation is bad. Money, it's not so bad, and he leaves that internal thought conflict being unsure about it. The Baron interrupts Javier's thoughts by assigning him a new mission. He doesn't have to keep an eye on Lloyd anymore, but to be Lloyd's proper escort. Javier accepts it, not fully on board with it, thinking that he could never respect Lloyd. Javier gets back to reminiscing about how the Baron saved him from the streets, gave him a home, and offered him his full support for anything he wants to achieve. Javier of course wanted to become a knight that will protect the Baron as his expression of gratitude, and the Baron took this dream of little Javier very seriously and gifted him a wooden sword that he crafted by himself. And the person who actually broke that wooden sword was none other than Lloyd, and Javier still keeps that broken sword with him, which reminds him of why he can never like Lloyd. In the next scene we see Lloyd putting Javier to sleep, which has become their regular routine. Javier has internal struggles because he's supposed to hate Lloyd, but he can't help but to see him as a different person now, and even thinking that he's a decent person. As he was thinking this, he fell asleep. In the middle of the night, while both Lloyd and Javier were asleep, the window of the room opened and a cloaked intruder comes in with a sword. The face looks familiar. He looks where Lloyd is, moves above him, and as he was about to pierce our protagonist, Javier with lightning speed jumps from the chair he was sleeping in and leaps towards the intruder, cutting his sword in half. Then he puts the intruder down while Lloyd was just waking up clueless, just becoming aware of what was happening. Next day we see work still ongoing, Lloyd reminding his people that safety comes first. Javier then tells Lloyd that he sent the intruder's personal information to Lacona's Viscount. The intruder was Lacona's former representative, and Lloyd says that the most probable reason why he was targeted by the representative is because the Viscount didn't have money to pay him and had to fire him. Our protagonist says that he would do the same if he was in this situation. Javier tells him that if he expected the possibility of it happening, he should have prepared for it somehow. Lloyd with a puzzled face just tells Javier that he has no need to prepare for anything if he's got him by his side. He'll be able to do all these things because Javier is there. That's how competent and reliable Javier is for our protagonist. Lloyd reminds him of his origins, how he survived the cold winter when he was 5 years old, and everything else made him who he is today, and how could he not rely on him? Who would be more trustworthy? Javier doesn't believe what he just heard and is speechless, and this makes him hate himself even more because he doesn't want to allow himself to think of Lloyd as a decent person. The system notifies our protagonist that Javier's resentment lifted and that their relationship improved, and he also gets some extra RPs because of this. Lloyd says that since the water pipe construction should be done by tomorrow, they should depart for the Cremo right away. And if you remember, bros, that huge monster appeared in Cremo, the red one. But that's all for today's video, and we'll find out how they'll deal with the monster in the next part. I'm sorry for not making this video 2 hours long as promised, but it's almost 2 hours long, so I hope you can understand it. For the next couple of weeks, I won't be posting daily videos, but I'll be posting 2-hour-long videos every 3 days, actual 2-hour-long videos. See? Thank you so much for watching, and as always, stay awesome, bros, and peace!